Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Can you all hear me? Fine. I'm going to talk today a bit about an indoor climate incentive program, but I'll just shortly try to explain the world I'm coming from. I am not a scientist, but I'm working as an administrator of social housing. So I'm sort of a owner of all of those houses that you're experimenting in or advising us to build. So it's from that perspective that I'll just give you some look into one of our development projects. And just very briefly, public housing, social housing in Denmark, it's social housing is for everyone. It's not dependent on your income. About 20% of the Danish population live in social housing. The company from where I come, we administrate among approximately 60,000 homes, and they're scattered all over Denmark, which is not a very big country, but still, it's both in our capital and in the countryside. And we have approximately 70,000 tenants. And this experiment that I'm going to talk a little bit more about is based on 4 different locations all over Denmark. We have in the sector, and that's not just in my company, it's also in the other social housing companies, we all work non-profit, and we have a severe tenant democracy and a stable financial model. And when I drag these 3 points out among a lot of others, it's because when we do development projects and when we look into improving the housing, it's not to benefit financially, it's to make the indoor climate, for instance, better for those living in it, but also for preserving the houses so we can make a more sustainable way of maintenance. The tenant democracy is mentioned here because I may be an administrator, but the real owners are the tenants. And that's for a private developer, it's very difficult to understand that a person living only part-time of her or his life is also owning and having the ownership of the building, and thereby also the right to decide what to do and what not to do. And stable financial model means, as it was said earlier, we don't have much money, but the money we have, they are pretty sure we don't go bankrupt, hopefully, so you can rely on us in that sense. We have some visions for our tenants. We want to make better homes. We want our tenants to be proud, and we want to make sustainable buildings. We build for a lot of different people, and I won't drag you through all of it, but of course it's both for the young people and the older people and the families and the single persons. And that was the wrong way, yeah. And we built, we built small houses and big houses. We try to take care of loneliness. It's been mentioned before, it's also in Denmark a huge issue. For instance, we see a lot of community housing as sort of an answer to the loneliness. So we're in it here for making more healthier buildings. And this program I want to show you is, maybe I'm not bringing very much new into the agenda because you've already made an example or many examples of active housing. But we have tried in this program to try to measure and try to make our tenants act in another and different way and more rational way. in order to make a better climate. So, in a very simple diagram, since I'm not an engineer, we want to have a healthier indoor climate. It will give us healthier tenants and increase their quality of life. It will also, we know, give healthier buildings, prolonging the life of the buildings, will lower the carbon footprint use. It'll give us a better economy, and it'll bring the rent down. And of course, in the big scale, it'll prolong the life of the buildings, so we don't have to tear them down and build new, so we save energy and we save some of the resources in the world. So it all makes sense to try to do something as you do here in the conference. We have, of course, since it's not totally succeeded our program, we have, of course, some issues. And you've mentioned some of them just earlier, and maybe some of what I'm going to say is a repetition. But if this is a sort of a diagram of a house, some of our houses are old, and they are built before the energy crisis in the 70s, so the insulation is poor, and it's difficult for the heat plant to provide the necessary heat in the dwellings in the placed far away from the heat system. We also have tenants acting non-rational or acting on their own behalf, and they, for instance, by turning down the heat, they are gain up to 70%. Someone has measured that you can actually gain from your heat bill. If you turn down the heat, the neighbors will turn up their heat, and your heat bill will be lower, and the neighbors will unfortunately be higher, but that's not your problem. So a lot of those ways of behaving, which probably just are very human, but being fair is more difficult to say they are. Our goal was initially to make energy renovation and to try to make a more fair way of distributing the bill for all the heat and the water and so on, but also and especially to make it healthier indoor. We have also, of course, tenants who don't want to have draft, so they needn't open the windows. It's better just to make sure there are no unwanted fresh air coming in. People who want to save on the bill, but also people who actually want to have it much warmer than it is possible for them in the flat. And that's a point because we have this rebound effect. So when some of our advisors go out and tell us how much we can save if we make an energy renovation, sometimes they forget that the people who are having 18 or 20 degrees in the living room, they would love to have 25. So once they get the opportunity to have it, when the energy renovation is done, they'll turn off the heat, and the saving will not be as high as promised from the advisors. So then we have also, of course, the issue about renters and owners. And it's not that I think it's different species, but it's just there's some psychology involved in the special way of organizing a building. And when you're in this democracy, tenant democracy that I spoke about earlier, you tend to act accordingly to that. And that makes, for instance, if you're an owner, whatever you do with your house or your flat, it makes total sense to you. You'll get the benefit either here and now or later on when you sell your flat. If you're a tenant, some things are implemented in the flat or in the house that will be of benefit to the next tenant and not to yourself, which is a difficult thing to agree to pay for, putting it just shortly. Our findings are not in rocket science business line, but if we want to change something in the flats or in our dwellings, we need to make decisions or ways for the tenants that are very easily understood. It's very intuitively. They need to just dig into it, and we need to make sure that they understand why and what it is good for. This is an example for a tenant who got a conservatory, and of course it was not insulated. It was, the meaning was that it used to be an open space, and then they got glasses around so he could use it a little more often. But the first thing he does is to ask around in the network if someone knows how to heat it up. And it should be a movable installation. So he wants to. It's one layer of glass in the new room, and it's not to point fingers of him. It's just to tell what some of the issues are when installing and rearranging. So of course we need to make some solutions that are intuitively easy. So we started this indoor climate project, and the whole idea is to not to give them the tenants a bill for how much water and how much electricity and how much heat they're using, oil or whatever they're using to heat up the flat, but instead to concentrate the bill on the carbon footprint in the dwelling, in the indoor climate. So we are connecting the financial situation of the tenant with the indoor climate. And that is actually a large paradigm shift, a shift of paradigms, because you need to start thinking in a whole different way that you're used to. Those of us who are either before the oil crisis or in the slip of the oil crisis know that we were all taught to turn down the heat in order to save energy. It all came down to saving money and saving, not having to buy so much oil from the oil-producing companies. But here, the answer is not always to turn down the heat. It's much more a question of ensuring that the level of the degrees and the humidity and the particles per million are kept in a healthy combination. So the project goes that they have a thing that measures their temperature and the humidity and the CO2, and then they have to pay in order in compliance with that. So they get a bill with some diagrams where it said, are you in the green area or yellow or red? And before that they have, I'll just turn over to this. This is in Danish, but this is a part of the information meeting with the tenants where they discuss how much should we pay per unit being in the green zone, how much should we pay more being in the yellow zone, and how much should we pay for being in the red zone. And being in the red zone is where you're really acting not rational and not for a good climate. And this is a picture trying to illustrate for the people how does the indoor climate look in your apartment? How has it been? At what time of the day is it typical problems, in order for them to change behavior. And of course, it's followed up with a lot of information about opening the windows and not turning the heat down too low, and not remembering to get the steam out once you've been bathing and so on. We have been running the project for 1.5 years, and it seems as if there is a change actually in behavior. The people are letting in much more fresh air. The idea of just keeping the doors and windows closed once you've been in bathing because it's nice and warm are being changed with a wish to get in fresh air. There's also a more fair distribution of the bill. Before, they used to pay between 1 and 70 kroner per square meter for the consumption, and now the span is reduced to between 3.5 and 5.5 kroner, and that gives a big incentive for the tenants to act accordingly to the better indoor climate. There are also some issues. We have an institute running an evaluation at the moment. They are not finished, but I have been allowed to quote some of their findings, and they have a finding that it's a huge paradigm shift, and you'd know it is, of course. The building can work against you. You were just mentioning it. There may be windows in the old buildings where the sun gets in and they can't get rid of the heat, and they are actually fine for that. And there's an issue about what to do when you're not at home, but I can hear here today and yesterday that there are solutions for that. You can get more equipment so the windows can open even when you're not at home. So just here finally, before Larry cuts off the microphone, what we were hoping to gain, I'm not sure we're right there at the yet. Communication, information, dialogue, and listening, it cannot be done too much, I'm sure. If you can't get the tenants on board, it doesn't matter. And that was actually my point about the tenant democracy. If the scientists and the advisors and the ones administrating the houses cannot explain the tenants what the idea is of making a healthier indoor climate and cannot nudge them to act accordingly, they'll just turn down the project. So they have the power to turn their back to the development project, and I'm sure they'll do it if it doesn't make sense for them. Being able to influence on the financial side is one issue, but if it isn't done voluntarily, I'm not sure we'll succeed. So in the next year, we'll get much more result because they're just starting to combine the way of measuring and the actual pay. So at the moment, I think the tenants are not really aware that they are going. Some of them are experiencing higher rents in the months because it's more equal. So maybe next year I'll I'll come back to you with some more news. So I'm out. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.